So after the morning's talks, I thought, what can I do to improve? So, Paul took off his shirt. I can't do that, but, I thought maybe I'll take off my, no. So I want to talk a little bit about labor and motivation. And when we think about people as workforce, we often think about people like rats in a maze. We think that people hate working. We think that all people want to do is to sit on the beach drinking mojitos, and the only reason that they work is that we pay them so they can sit on the beach drinking mojitos. But is this the case? We have things like mountain climbing. Mountain climbing is a really challenging thing. When you read books of people who climb mountains, you would think that those books would be filled with moments of elation and joy. No, they're filled with moments of misery and pain, frostbites. So you would think that once people get up with these experiences and come down, they will say, my goodness, this was a terrible mistake, I'll never, never do it again. No, they go straight up. They heal, they get recovered, and they go straight up. And this, I think, proposes a real challenge for what do we think about joy and what do we think about motivation and what actually gets people to care. I started thinking about meaning and motivation in the workplace when one of my ex-students came back to see me. His name was David, still is David. He came to see me and he told me the following story. He said that he was working at an investment bank preparing a PowerPoint presentation for a merger and acquisition. He was working on it for weeks, was working hard, staying up late at night, and the day before the merger and acquisition was going to take place, he mailed this PowerPoint presentation to his boss, and his boss wrote him quickly back saying, nice job, the deal is canceled. Now, throughout the process, he was incredibly excited. He was working, he was thinking happy. His boss appreciated it, but the fact that nobody was going to see it deflated him. In fact, when he was looking at his next projects, he couldn't really find that much motivation. And if you think about it, it's interesting because physically everything was okay. His boss appreciated it, he would probably get the raise, everything was okay, but something was missing that is more, kind of a more general meaning for what he was doing. So I thought, how can we capture it with some simple experiments? So I decided to build Legos. So we paid people to build Lego Bionicles, like the ones that you see. And we paid people in diminishing rate. So here's what happened. You came in and we say, would you like to build one Bionicle? We'll pay you $3 for it. And if you said yes, you would build it. And when you finished, we took it back and we say, would you like to build another one for $2.70? And if you finished that and wanted another one, for $2.40, and so on. And the question was, at what point will people stop? Okay? And we told people that we take the Bionicles, we'll put them under the desk, and we'll break them into pieces for the next participant. This was the first condition. People build one after the other, after the other, after the other. The second condition we call the Sisyphic condition. If you remember the story of Sisyphus, Sisyphus basically was sentenced by the gods to push a rock up a big mountain. And the almost moment he got there, the rock would roll back and he would have to do it again. And you could think about how demotivating this is, right? And how better it would be if at least there were different mountains he would push the rock over. But being the same mountain over and over and over is demotivating. So that's what we try to do in the Sisyphic condition. We gave people a Bionicle. When they finished it, we said, would you like to build another one? If they said yes, we gave them the second one. But as they were working on the second one, we took the first one to pieces in front of their eyes. And then if they wanted to build the third one, we gave the first one back to them. So we had an endless cycle of breaking and creating, creating and breaking. What happened? The first thing that happened was that people built many more Bionicles, right, in the meaningful condition compared to the Sisyphic condition. And what I should point out here is that the meaning in the meaningful condition was not really high meaning. This was a tiny meaning. Right? So the fact that just destroying it in front of their eyes a few minutes earlier made a difference is quite important. The second thing is that we asked another group of people to predict how big the effect will be. We said, if you were in this experiment, how many Bionicles do you think people will build here, and how many will they build here? And people understood that the meaningful condition would create higher motivation, but they didn't understand the magnitude of that. So people thought that the difference was one Bionicle. In fact, it was much larger. And finally, we looked at the correlation between how much people love Bionicles and how many Bionicles they created. You would expect that naturally people who love Bionicles more will build more Bionicles even for less money. And that's indeed what we saw. In the meaningful condition, there was a nice correlation. People who love Bionicles build more. People who don't like Bionicles as much don't build as much. What happened in the Sisyphic condition? In the Sisyphic condition, there was no correlation. We were basically able, by destroying people's labor in front of their eyes, to crush the joy out of this process. After I finished this study, I went to talk to a big software company in Seattle. And this was a big room full with 200 engineers. And these were engineers that worked for 2 years about the project that they thought would be the next development for this big software company. And a week before I came, the CEO canceled the project. And I never sat in front of a group of more depressed people. Right? And I asked them, how many of you show up later for work these days? They all raised their hands. I said, how many of you leave earlier? They all raised their hands. I said, how many of you charge extra things on your expense account? Nobody raised their hand, but he took me for dinner that night. And they showed me what they could do with creativity. And they said they felt just like in the Lego experiment. Right? They basically felt that somebody canceled something in front of their eyes, under their feet, without letting them have any meaning of what they were doing. Now, here's the thing. I think the CEO of that company did not understand the meaning of labor. He just said, okay, I redirected you in this direction up to now. Let me redirect you somewhere else, and you will just go in the way I think. This is not how people operate. And I asked these people, I said, what could the CEO have done? Let's say he had to cancel the project. What could he have done to keep some of your motivation? And they came up with all kinds of ideas. They said, what if he allowed them to do a presentation in front of the whole company? What if he asked them to build a few more prototypes, to try and think about what aspect of the technology that they were developing could fit in other projects? Now, the thing is that any one of those aspects, any one of those approaches would demand some effort, attention, and time. And if you don't think people care about their meaning, you wouldn't spend that time. But if you understand how important meaning is, you might do that. In the next experiment, we took this a step further. We asked people to find some letters in a sheet of paper. And again, they got more money for the first sheet and less for the second and less for the third and so on. And for some people, we had what we call the meaningful condition. We asked people to write their name on each sheet, and when they gave it to the experimenter looked at it from top to bottom, said, uh-huh, and put it on the side. In a second condition, the experiment didn't look at it. There was no name. The experiment just took it from the participant and put it on the desk. In the third condition, the experimenter simply took the sheet and directly put it through a shredder. Now, I should point out that in this third condition, when the page goes directly into a shredder and nobody looks, you could cheat, right? You could be dishonest and do more sheets for less money and put less effort into it. What were the results? In the acknowledged condition, when we looked at it, people worked all the way down to 15 cents. They worked quite a lot. In the shredded condition, people stopped much faster, right? So people cared more about, they enjoyed more the labor in the acknowledged condition. What about the ignored condition? Where does it sit in the middle? Is it close to the acknowledged, the shredder, or somewhere in the middle? Well, very, very close to the shredded condition. So I guess the good news here is that if you want to motivate people, simply looking at what they've done and say, I've acknowledged, I've seen that you've done something, seems to be sufficient, even without a nice word, right? Just acknowledge people. On the other hand, it turns out that if you really want to motivate people, to demotivate people, it's incredibly easy. Shredding, of course, is the optimal way to demotivate people if you want to go. But just ignoring what they're doing gets you almost all the way there. So this was all about demotivating people. There are lots of ways to demotivate people, and we should try and avoid those. What about motivating people? What about the second part of this equation? And for me, the insight for this part of the story came from Ikea. So I don't know about you, but I have some Ikea furniture. And when I reflect back on the experience, it turns out that it took me a long time to assemble these instructions. to assemble this furniture. The instructions were not clear. I would put things in the wrong place. I would have to disassemble it. But what I've also noticed is that I keep on looking fondly at this Ikea furniture. We share something in common that I think is more than just buying something in a store. And you can wonder what happens when you invest some of your love and effort and attention, even frustration, into something. Do you start loving it more? And there's an old story, it's kind of a nice story. It's a story about cake mixes. When they introduced cake mixes in the US, it turns out housewife at the time did not accept them. They had mixers for all kinds of things, for muffins, for bread. Cake mixes, not so much. And they wondered why. The taste was perfectly fine. They found out that what was missing was a feeling of labor. If you basically put some water and a cake mix, mix it together, put it in the oven and a cake comes out, you can't take credit for that. If somebody comes and says, nice cake, thank you, you've not done anything. So what did they do? They took the eggs and the milk out of it. Now you put the cake mix, you break some eggs, you put some milk, now it's your cake. So how do we test this idea? We started by asking people to build origami. We gave people instructions to how to fold origami, and these were people who don't really know how to do origami, so they came up with kind of ugly origami, but that's okay. And then we told them that we actually own that origami, and we asked them how much would you pay for you to keep it. And we tried to measure how valuable they thought this origami was. And people loved the origamis that they created. Then we asked other people that did not build that origami what they thought about this origami. And they didn't like it as much. So the builders thought this origami was fantastic, the evaluators, not so much. Now the question is, are the builders, in their mind, do they think that they are the only one who love this origami? So do I look at this origami and say, oh, this is mine? I think it's wonderful. I know that nobody would like it, but for me it's wonderful. No, they think everybody would love it as much as they do. The next thing was the Ikea effect, right? The Ikea, what about the instructions? What if the instructions are difficult and complex? So we gave the easy instructions to some people, and for other people we hid what's on the top, which are the manual of what does a fold mean and so on. So the hard instructions were really baffling. What happened now? So first of all, we got the basic result. The builders love their own origami more than evaluators. What happened when the instructions are more difficult? Now the builders love it even more, and the evaluators dislike it even more. Why? Because objectively it was worse off, right? So the evaluators saw the objective quality of these crumbled pieces of paper and didn't like it as much. The builders thought it was even more fantastic. So not only is labor leading to love, more labor and more effort and more investment leads to higher love. I think this is also, you can think about kids this way. So imagine that you have kids, and I ask you, how much would you sell me your kids for? Right? Your memory and attention and experience about them. And most people on good days say, a lot of money. But imagine you didn't have your kids, and you went to the park, and you met some kids very much like yours, and you played with them for a few hours, and then you were about to say goodbye, and before you left, their parents said, by the way, you know, they're for sale. How much would you pay for them? Right? Most people realize not that much. And I think it's because the kids are really kind of the optimal example for the Ikea effect. They're complex, they're difficult, the instruction manual is not that good. We invest a lot of effort in them, and our tremendous love to them is largely a part of us investing in them rather than who they are. That is, by the way, our kids, who are wonderful. And not only are our kids wonderful, we don't understand that other people don't see our kids in the way that we do. Right? So what do we have to say about all of this? There's kind of two competing theories about labor, Adam Smith and Karl Marx. Adam Smith gave us this wonderful example of efficiency in the labor market. He showed how you can take a pin factory, and if you take one laborer who makes all steps, all 12 steps to create a pin, that's really inefficient. And if you break the job into 12 pieces and each person does their own piece of the work, the efficiency of the whole is incredibly increasing, dramatically increasing. And that's really what the Industrial Revolution has given us in terms of increasing productivity. Karl Marx, on the other hand, told us that it's about alienation of labor and how much do you feel connected to your labor. And these ideas are really standing in opposition to each other. Which one is more important, the efficiency or the feeling of connection to the labor? So if you think about taking a big job and breaking into pieces, it might become more efficient, but as you break it into pieces, the people who do each of the pieces don't feel connected to the same degree to what they're doing. So which one is more important? So I think that the industrial economy time, Smith was more correct than Marx, right? There were tremendous efficiency gains. But what's happening now in the knowledge economy? What happens when people have more control over what they're doing? When we want people to think about their labor in the shower, when they talk to friends, when we want people to be fully engaged and really immersed in what they're doing, I think that now things have changed. In the knowledge economy, I think the notion of Marx are actually more important, and it might be useful to sometimes sacrifice some efficiency for more meaning at work. So, you know, we have this very simple model of labor, which says that people work for money, and often we pay people just with this notion. But I think there are two things to consider. The first one is that we care about much more things than money. We care about meaning, we care about creation, we care about challenge, ownership, identity, pride, and so on. And the really good news about it is that if we're able to create workplaces that give people all of those things, everybody would be better off. The workplace would be better off, the individual would be better off. It's a tremendous, wonderful thing about human nature that we can be motivated by a whole range of aspects. The question is, how do we use the workplace and society in general to tap into all of those motivations? And thank you very much.